Imagine a hidden battle in the heavens, where the fate of a beloved leader's body hangs in the balance. Why, you might wonder, does a dispute over Moses' body hold such power in our faith? It's not just a story of loss. It's a divine conflict between good and evil that teaches us about authority, purpose, and the eternal struggle for our souls. Today we'll uncover the profound depths of this biblical mystery, and I promise it will lead you to reflect on your own spiritual journey. So as we embark on this exploration together, take a moment to subscribe and share in the comments where you're from and how Jesus has impacted your life. Remember, Jesus will bless you, and he is always with you on this path of discovery. Moses' life unfolds as a grand tapestry of divine intervention and human perseverance, a saga that deeply intertwines with the collective identity of the Israelites. Born into an era of oppression, Moses entered the world at a time when Pharaoh's decree threatened every Hebrew infant boy. Yet from the outset, his life was marked by divine providence, rescued from the waters of the Nile by Pharaoh's own daughter, who took him into the Egyptian royal household. Thus, Moses grew up amidst Egyptian opulence and learning, yet retained an innate connection to his Hebrew roots. This duality laid the groundwork for his later mission, serving as both a bridge and a catalyst between two worlds. His early life in Egypt, surrounded by the penetrating intellect and spiritual longing of his Hebrew kin, imbued him with a unique perspective and an acute sense of justice. This sense of justice reached a critical juncture when Moses, witnessing an Egyptian overseer brutalizing a Hebrew slave, intervened and killed the oppressor. Fleeing into exile, Moses found sanctuary in Midian, where he spent years as a shepherd. This period of seclusion and reflection prepared him for a transformative encounter with the divine. The turning point came on Mount Horeb, where the unassuming shepherd experienced a transcendent moment when God appeared to him in a burning bush. Here he received his divine commission to liberate the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. The burning bush not only symbolized God's presence, but also marked the beginning of Moses' journey as a prophet and leader of unparalleled stature. Returning to Egypt, Moses confronted Pharaoh with a divinely ordained message: "Let my people go." This demand initiated a series of catastrophic plagues that eventually compelled Pharaoh to release the Israelites. Moses' leadership during the Exodus exemplified a fusion of faith and fortitude, guiding a vast multitude across the desert towards freedom. The parting of the Red Sea stands out as a monumental event in this journey, manifesting God's power and Moses' pivotal role as mediator. As the waves receded, swallowed up in the depths of the sea, the Israelite passage transformed from a frantic escape into a divine act of deliverance. It was an indelible affirmation of the unlimited power of Yahweh, and the evolving leadership of Moses was subtly shaped by such pervasive manifestations of divine might. This narrative trajectory led to the Sinai wilderness, where the Israelites gathered at the foot of the mountain to receive the Torah. Moses ascended the heights of Mount Sinai and communed with God, receiving laws that would shape the moral and spiritual fabric of the Israelite community. The Ten Commandments handed to Moses became a covenant, a binding promise between God and his chosen people. This moment encapsulated the essence of their relationship, a commitment to divine laws underscored by Yahweh's promise of protection and guidance. The commandments laid the ethical foundation not only for the Israelites, but also for much of Western civilization, illuminating Moses' enduring legacy. As a leader, Moses faced unrelenting trials, from the grumbling discontent of his people to the trials posed by the arduous desert journey. His leadership style combined a deep humility with an unwavering commitment to realize the promise of a land flowing with milk and honey. He shouldered the burdens of an often recalcitrant people with patience and resolve. Through these trials, Moses' resilience became emblematic of God's enduring faithfulness. Yet perhaps his greatest legacy fares not found just in his accomplishments, but in his humanity, marked by moments of doubt, anger, and frailty. His inability to enter the Promised Land, due to striking the rock in anger rather than speaking to it as commanded by God, reinforces this. This decree did not diminish his stature, but rather enhanced his image as a leader whose life was dedicated to a mission greater than himself. Moses' death marked the end of an era, a pivotal transition from wilderness wandering to the entrance into the Promised Land. His unique legacy is preserved in the memory of liberation and covenant, a narrative that resonates through generations. As we reflect upon his life, it is not merely an ancient story, but an enduring call to recognize the dance of divine intervention and human agency, the intricate weaving of destiny through humble yet stalwart leadership. Through Moses, God demonstrated his compassion and justice, reminding his people and us of the redemptive power of faith and perseverance. Moses' negotiating role in leading the Israelites from shackles into new hope is forever etched in the annals of history. Each of us, in seeking to embody these qualities, participates in the unfolding narrative of redemption, welcoming the divine presence into our wilderness journeys and covenant-making as we press towards the promises awaiting us. The enigmatic tale of the dispute over Moses' body, as outlined in Jude 1.9, offers a fascinating glimpse into the spiritual dimensions that extend beyond our mortal understanding. In this scene, we see the archangel Michael engaged in a mysterious confrontation with Satan himself. What could be so significant about Moses' physical remains that it would warrant such a heavenly encounter? This question leads us to explore the narrative in greater depth, considering the spiritual battles that play out in realms unseen, as well as the divine care that God demonstrates for his chosen leader. Moses' life was a testament to God's unwavering guidance and love, yet his death also held profound significance. Deuteronomy 34 tells us that Moses' burial site is unknown, because God himself interred him in a secret location in the valley of Moab. This deliberate concealment raises numerous theological and symbolic questions, especially in light of the Judean passage. The act of God personally taking charge of Moses' burial signifies a deep personal affection and respect for Moses' role as a faithful servant and leader. The spiritual contest over Moses' body acts as a metaphor for the continuous spiritual warfare that influences our physical existence. It signifies that there are struggles beyond human perception, reminding believers that their battles may not only be fought in the visible realm. Michael's involvement suggests the protection that the divine provides against malevolent forces, emphasizing that even in death, God's servants are under his care. This spiritual dimension reveals how the events surrounding Moses' death may be symbolic of broader battles between good and evil. In a world where physical evidence often holds sway over belief, the absence of Moses' physical resting place protects against the potential for idolatry. Bodies of great leaders can become sites of pilgrimage and adulation, sometimes diverting attention from the leader's message to their mere physicality. The hidden location of Moses' resting place serves to refocus the followers toward his teachings and the God he served, rather than the mortal remains he left behind. Satan's role in this narrative is intriguing, as he is depicted as an adversary seeking to lay claim over Moses' body. This depiction aligns with Satan's reputation as an accuser and destroyer, continually seeking to disrupt God's plans. The dispute over this esteemed prophet's body may symbolize Satan's desire to undermine the sacred legacy Moses left on earth, perhaps to tarnish his memory or to disturb the spiritual continuity he fostered among the Israelites. It illustrates the ongoing struggles faced by faith communities as they seek to maintain the purity of their beliefs against external spiritual threats. The story, although brief and shrouded in mystery, teaches the value of humility and obedience to divine will. Jude 1:9 notes that Michael did not dare to bring a railing accusation against Satan, but simply stated, "The Lord rebuke you." Michael's deference to divine authority underscores the proper attitude of dependence on God, rather than on one's own strength or righteousness. This episode underscores the necessity of placing trust in divine justice and timing, rather than engaging in battles with our authority. The deeper reflections emerging from this dispute encourage believers to remain steadfast in their faith, even when faced with circumstances that defy human logic. Recognizing the invisible spiritual forces at play calls for a discerning and prayerful approach to life's challenges. This narrative compels us to examine the unseen spiritual realities and to draw strength from God's promises of protection and guidance. Such teachings complement the lessons found in Moses' life, as he continuously depended on God's instructions through numerous trials and triumphs. In a similar fashion, the narrative pertaining to the dispute over his body serves as a potent reminder of the profound belief in God's sovereignty over life and death. It provides assurance that God's purposes will prevail, regardless of any attempts by adversaries to thwart his divine plans. Ultimately, this mysterious dispute presents an opportunity to reflect on God's overarching providence and the spiritual truths woven into the fabric of biblical history. As the narrative feeder to the following reflections on Moses' culminating acts of disobedience and the lessons they impart, it completes the arc of understanding the holistic life and legacy of Moses in light of divine intention and spiritual warfare, setting the stage for the vital teachings imbued within his experiences. Moses, the revered leader who guided the Israelites out of Egypt, stands as one of the most important figures in biblical history. Yet, despite his remarkable achievements, Moses himself was not without fault. One of his most significant missteps occurred during the incident at Meribah, where an act of disobedience prevented him from entering the Promised Land. This pivotal moment offers profound lessons on obedience, humility, and the nature of faith, serving as a potent reminder of the consequences of deviating from divine instructions. In Numbers 20, the Israelites once again found themselves complaining, desiring water in the barren desert. God, in his mercy, provided Moses with explicit instructions. He was to speak to the rock before the eyes of the people, and water would gush forth to quench their thirst. However, in a moment of frustration and perhaps personal pride, Moses struck the rock twice with his staff, a deviation from the divine command. Though water indeed flowed, the deeper spiritual damage was done. Instead of sanctifying God before the people, Moses' actions became a moment of personal assertion. This narrative speaks deeply about the importance of obedience in one's spiritual journey. Moses' act was not simply about disregarding a command. It symbolized a failure to uphold God's holiness before the congregation. Disobedience at its core is often rooted in a lack of trust or an elevation of one's understanding above divine wisdom. In striking the rock, Moses took matters into his own hands, altering a divine directive that was meant to demonstrate God's power to the people. This act of defiance resulted in God declaring that Moses would not lead the Israelites into the Promised Land, a poignant reminder that actions, irrespective of intention, carry consequences. Humility emerges as another core lesson from Moses' mistake. Throughout his life, Moses was hailed for his meekness, yet even he fell prey to the human tendency of elevating oneself. His striking of the rock could be interpreted as a lapse where personal emotions took precedence over humility and service. It serves as a caution to all, emphasizing that humility is not a static characteristic, but one that requires constant vigilance and surrender to God's authority. Moreover, this event highlights the danger of familiarization, where repeated successes may lead to complacency or superiority. Moses, who had earlier been the conduit of God's miracles, perhaps felt confident in his role as a leader and mediator. Yet even the greatest leaders must remember their place as servants first, submitting entirely to God's sovereignty. Reflection on this moment from Moses' life encourages us to examine our own lives for areas where we might have acted similarly, where personal conviction might have overridden divine instructions. Are there instances where feelings of frustration led us to act without seeking God's guidance? Do we at times prioritize our desires or interpretations above God's explicit words? To learn from Moses' mistake is to commit to a deeper level of spiritual discipline, encompassing a proactive stance towards prayer and discernment. When faced with decisions or trials, turning to God's will as described in Scripture can offer clarity and direction. As believers, the emphasis should always be on listening and acting according to divine wisdom, understanding that our actions are not just about immediate results, but about upholding God's sanctity. Furthermore, Moses' experience offers a lens through which we can view divine grace and mercy. Despite his error, Moses continued to serve as a spiritual leader, and his legacy remains as one of the most significant in biblical history. God's decision to personally handle Moses' burial as previously discussed, underscores the intimate relationship between God and his servant, exhibiting a grace that transcends human imperfection. In our spiritual walk, it becomes essential to recognize the duality of receiving God's grace while striving for obedience. This dichotomy encourages a faith that is both humble and reliant on divine guidance, understanding that even as we falter, God's grace remains steadfast. Moses' story, especially his moments of error, remains an enduring guide. It is a call to cultivate a life marked by obedience, humility, and continuous submission to God's will. Through reflection and prayer, the lessons from Moses' mistakes can transform our approach to faith, ensuring that, unlike Moses, we do not fall short of the promises awaiting us. As we move forward in our exploration of Moses' journey, considering how these lessons apply to broader spiritual conflicts, the importance of obedience and humility before divine authority is underscored. Recognizing the profound implications of faith, we prepare to delve into the ultimate victories accessible through steadfast devotion, embracing the spiritual protections and grace extended to us. The spiritual battle over Moses' body after his death is a vivid portrayal of the ongoing cosmic struggle between good and evil, transcending earthly affairs and mortality. This clash involving Satan highlights the adversary's relentless pursuit of influence, using every possible opportunity to undermine God's purposes. The narrative underscores not only the immortality of spiritual warfare, but also God's unwavering resolve to preserve the sanctity and integrity of his divine plan, illuminating the depths of moral and spiritual terrain that govern our existence. Satan's motives for contesting Moses' body could stem from a desire to corrupt or destroy what God has deemed sacred. Moses, despite his human imperfections, remained a vessel of God's grace and an emblem of divine leadership. By seeking to claim his body, Satan might have aimed to sow confusion among the Israelites, possibly turning Moses into an object of veneration and idolatry, rather than preserving the focus on God himself. This cunning maneuver speaks to Satan's insidious strategy to exploit human tendencies toward idolatry, diverting devotion from God by raising human figures too high and thus distorting spiritual perception. This scenario reflects themes vividly explored in Revelation 12:10, where the ultimate supremacy of divine power over satanic schemes is proclaimed. Here we see the accuser of the brethren cast down, highlighting the temporary nature of Satan's power against the backdrop of God's eternal dominion. Satan can deceive or mislead, but he cannot overcome a soul anchored in God's truth and grace. This underscores the spiritual integrity required to resist idolatry, the act of honoring and trusting God above all human constructs and influences. The struggle over Moses' body not only underscores the perennial battle between good and evil, but also highlights God's grace that surpasses human imperfection. Moses was not flawless, and his life was marked by notable lapses in faith, as illustrated by his exclusion from the Promised Land despite his pivotal role in leading the Israelites. Yet, it was grace that defined his relationship with God, underscoring that divine purpose prevails despite our imperfections. God's decision to contend with Satan over Moses' body reveals his commitment to safeguard his chosen despite their human frailties. The tale encourages believers to remain steadfast, exercising faith over fear in the face of spiritual adversity. As James 4:7 advises, by submitting to God and resisting the devil, he will flee from us. This call to surrender aligns us with God's divine authority and shields us from satanic machinations, whether in the grand narratives of biblical proportions or in the personal battles faced today. Spiritual victory is assured through humble submission and unwavering faith in God's plan. Ultimately, this narrative encourages the faithful to comprehend and harness the power of spiritual protections available in Jesus Christ. The security offered by faith in Jesus not only involves safeguarding our spirit, but extends to understanding the depths of God's protective embrace. When we embrace God's call to humility and obedience, as illustrated through Moses' journey, we align ourselves with the forces that guarantee victory amid spiritual battles. By contemplating this account, readers are called to a deeper awareness and commitment to spiritual integrity, rejecting idolatry in all its forms, and fortifying their resolve against temptations that detract from their divine purpose. The episode of Moses' contested body is a reminder that God's ultimate victory is assured, inviting us to trust in His perfect design, defend our faith valiantly, and live in expectation of His return and the fulfillment of His promises.